Hi, and welcome to our video on the characteristics of living things. So we're going to talk about 8 different things that living things must do or have in order to actually be considered living. It seems like it would be a really simple thing to say that something is a living thing or not, but there's actually some cases where it can be a little bit more difficult to figure out. And so scientists have come up with these list of 8 things that if you have all of them, you're considered a living thing. And if you are missing one or more, then you are not a living thing. So make sure while we're going through the video that you write down each thing. I would write the what it is, what the thing is that makes the living thing be living on the left-hand column, and then jot down just a couple brief notes that are more specific details about what that is on the right. So the first thing that living things need to have is that they need to be made of cells. So we've already learned the different parts of the cell, what cells do. It needs to have at least one or more cells. So there are single-celled organisms, and they have everything they need just from that single cell. So even though multicellular organisms like humans, animals, plants, we have specialized cells inside of our body that do these certain functions, but single-celled organisms can still function properly even though they're only made up of one single cell. So you could write made of cells on the left-hand column and then jot down a couple notes about that on the right-hand side. The second thing is that all living things must obtain and use energy. So living things have to get energy from their environment. In the case of plants and anything else that does photosynthesis, algae, bacteria, this comes from the sun. So they capture the sunlight energy during photosynthesis, and they make their own energy that way. Animals tend to eat things, whether it's plants or other animals, and then they break down those nutrients and make energy that way during a process called cellular respiration. Bacteria and fungi get their energy from usually decaying plant or animal matter or ingesting things that way. So they still get their energy from other sources and they don't actually create their own from the sun. But all living things need to obtain and use energy. The third thing is that all living things have to respond to their environment in some way, and this can look very different depending upon what organism you're talking about. So living things will make changes in response to a stimulus, something that they're sensing from the outside, and then they react to it in some way. This could be a behavior, or it could be as simple as a plant growing towards the sun, could be an animal that's body temperature is starting to rise and a fever, that they begin to sweat in order to maintain their body temperature, but they have to respond in some way to their environment. The fourth thing is that all living things need to grow and develop. So this could be cell division, the making of new cells, that cells get bigger, or through cell division, you get more of those cells. That would be growth. And then as multicellular organisms get more cells in them, they grow larger. They also tend to get a little bit more complex. A lot of times there's a development from a young organism to an older organism where structures will actually change. This could be anything from a plant growing and developing flowers or other structures to something like metamorphosis with a caterpillar changing into a butterfly, or even children changing into adults. If we think about humans, there's a lot of structures that need to grow and develop as that happens. Number 5 is that all living things need to have the ability to reproduce. So it's not that they actually reproduce. Just because you don't have children doesn't mean that you're not a living thing, but you need to have the ability to reproduce. So you do not have to reproduce to survive, but it does have to occur for a species to survive, a group of organisms that are considered a species. So there's 2 ways that you can go about this. Asexual reproduction. You should write this on the left-hand side of your paper. Asexual reproduction is producing offspring without the use of gametes. And I'd make a note there that a gamete is just a sex cell. So this would be like making a clone of oneself. So this would be more like unicellular organisms would produce using asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, again on the left-hand side, and then jot down some notes about it. This is producing offspring by joining sex cells. So this is where there is a male and female of a species, and they come together to make a new organism. Number 6 is that all living things must adapt to their environment. So adaptations are traits giving an organism an advantage in a certain environment. And there has to be variation of individuals in order to have a healthy species. If all the organisms are exactly the same and there's no difference, then it's really easy for something like a disease to come in and just wipe out everybody, and then that species dies off. So it's really important to have variation. And with this variation, sometimes there's one organism that's a little bit better fit for their environment. And whatever adaptation that is that makes them more fit, then that tends to be passed on more, and those individuals are going to survive, and eventually the species will actually change. So it's not individuals changing, it is the species changing. Number 7 is that all living things must contain DNA. So there is a universal genetic code. This is DNA. DNA is the same molecule throughout all living things. It's just put together in different ways depending upon the organism. So it's how organisms store the information that they need to survive and make more organisms, or to grow and develop, to basically just survive. All the instructions are contained within DNA. And the last thing is that all living things must maintain homeostasis. So here, homeostasis is a big word. I would write that on your left-hand side and then write the definition on your right. This is the process by which organisms keep their internal conditions relatively stable. So a really easy example to think about is, how do humans maintain the same body temperature? When we get too hot, we sweat, and the evaporation of the water on our body helps cool us down. When we get too cold, we shiver. That actually creates heat and helps warm us up. So in that way, we're able to maintain a constant body temperature. Some other examples would be maintaining a constant pH, constant temperature, salinity, so not having too much or too little salt, blood pressure. All of these things need to be maintained. It can be overall thought of as maintaining balance. So balance might be a good word to write down for maintaining homeostasis. And then last, I just have a quick review. You should go back, make sure that you got all 8 things that living things need to have written down, and some more detailed information on your right-hand side of your notes, so that way you can understand each of these a little bit more clearly.